So I wanted to talk about some opposition in the Bible. I want to talk about 1 Samuel 15:3, where God orders the death of men, women, children, and infants. And I want to emphasize that God ordered the death of the Amalekites because of their long line of wickedness. God gave them many, 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 many years to repent, to turn away from their wickedness, to stop killing Israelites who, by that time, were ancestors that would lead to Jesus Christ, who would save and redeem all of humanity. They were hindering that. And so God ordered their death. And I believe that the reason he ordered the death of infants and babies and children were because he didn't want them to be sacrificed anymore. He didn't want them to grow up in wickedness. So he asked them to be killed so they could be returned to him in heaven. Because it says in the New Testament, "Come, let the little children come to." It says, "Let the little children come to me, and don't hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." I believe that even though he ordered the death of those children, he is just to judge. If they were too young to understand the knowledge of sin, if they were too young to understand much of anything, God's not going to condemn them to hell. God's going to open his arms out and say, "Come, child. Come, my baby, my little one." The babies and everything, they're in heaven. I'm sure of it. But it was better to return to heaven than to be sacrificed or to lead a life of wickedness and just continue the generations of murder. God knows our entire lives, what we're going to do. He says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." He knows that we're going to sin. He knows that those babies and those children were probably going to grow up and be wicked, just like their parents, because if you're surrounded by wickedness, you will be wicked. We got to understand that we can't judge the Bible based on human standards and worldly standards. We got to understand what God does and how God judges fairly. You got to understand what heaven is. Heaven is eternal peace, eternal love. There's no pain in heaven. There's no sacrificing anything in heaven. There's only eternal peace and happiness and gratefulness to God. And it's because of that moment in the Bible that the Israelites were able to prosper and were able to live a long line that led to Jesus Christ, which redeemed everyone through his sacrifice. It was all ordained. Everything had to happen the way it had to happen. I'm sure if the Amalekites weren't continuously killing Israelites and weren't hindering God's plan, I'm sure none of them would have had to die. Think about that. We can't conform ourselves to our own understanding. Understand things from the Bible's perspective.